In the heart of the Appalachian Mountains, nestled deep within an isolated valley, there was a town called Ashwood. It was a quiet place, where life moved slowly and traditions ran deep. The people of Ashwood had lived there for generations, and they had little contact with the outside world. The valley's isolation was both a blessing and a curse, a sanctuary from the hustle and bustle of modern life, but also a prison from which there was no easy escape. One autumn, as the leaves turned gold and red, something changed in Ashwood. A sickness began to spread. At first, it seemed like nothing more than a particularly bad flu. People complained of fever, headaches, and fatigue. But then, the symptoms grew more severe. Those who fell ill became delirious, their skin turning ashen and their eyes glazed over with a milky film. They stopped speaking, stopped eating, and began to wander the streets in a daze, as if driven by some primal instinct. The town's doctor, Dr. Everett, had never seen anything like it. He tried everything he could: antibiotics, quarantine, herbal remedies passed down through generations, but nothing worked. The sickness spread rapidly, and within days, half the town was affected. Then came the first death. It was Old Man Jenkins, a fixture of the town for as long as anyone could remember. When his heart finally stopped, Dr. Everett pronounced him dead and prepared to arrange for his burial. But that night, something impossible happened. Old Man Jenkins rose from his bed. The next morning, his body was gone. Dr. Everett was baffled and more than a little frightened, but he couldn't have imagined what was to come. It wasn't long before Jenkins was spotted shambling through the woods on the outskirts of town, his skin pale and decaying, his eyes blank and lifeless. He was no longer the man the townspeople had known. He had become something else, something undead. Fear gripped Ashwood. The dead were not staying dead. One by one, those who had succumbed to the sickness returned as mindless, rotting corpses. They wandered the streets at night, attacking anyone they encountered, driven by a hunger that couldn't be satisfied. They weren't fast, but they were relentless, and their numbers grew with every passing day. The survivors barricaded themselves inside their homes, nailing boards over windows and doors, but it was only a matter of time before the zombies broke through. The town, once peaceful and serene, had become a nightmare. A small group of survivors banded together in the old church at the center of town. Among them were Dr. Everett, Sheriff Callahan, and a handful of others who had managed to avoid the sickness. The church, with its stone walls and heavy wooden doors, became their last refuge. Every night, they huddled inside, listening to the groans and shuffling footsteps of the undead outside. The group knew they couldn't stay in the church forever. Supplies were running low, and the zombies were becoming more aggressive. They needed a plan, a way out of the valley, away from the horrors that had overtaken their town. Sheriff Callahan suggested heading to the old coal mine on the other side of the mountain. It hadn't been used in decades, but there was a series of tunnels that led to the next valley over. If they could reach the mine, they might be able to escape the town and find help. It was a long shot, but it was their only hope. On the night they decided to leave, the group prepared as best they could. They armed themselves with whatever they could find: axes, kitchen knives, and even a few hunting rifles. Dr. Everett packed a small bag of medical supplies, though he knew there wasn't much he could do if someone was bitten. As they made their way through the town, the streets were eerily quiet. The only sound was the wind rustling through the trees and the distant groans of the undead. They moved quickly, sticking to the shadows, hoping to avoid the notice of the zombies that still wandered aimlessly through the town. But as they reached the edge of town, they encountered a small horde of the undead, blocking their path. There were too many to fight, and the group was forced to retreat, ducking into an abandoned building. Trapped and outnumbered, their situation seemed hopeless. Just when they thought all was lost, they heard a rumble in the distance. At first, they thought it was thunder, but then they realized it was something else: an engine. A large truck came barreling down the road, plowing through the zombies with ease. The truck skidded to a stop in front of the building, and a figure leaned out of the driver's side window. It was an outsider, a man in his 30s who introduced himself as Caleb. He had come from a nearby town, drawn by the rumors of Ashwood's plight. Caleb explained that the sickness had spread beyond the valley, other towns were falling, too. The world outside Ashwood wasn't much better, but there were pockets of resistance, places where the living were still fighting back. He offered to take the group with him, to bring them to safety. The survivors didn't hesitate. They piled into the truck, and Caleb gunned the engine, tearing through the horde and heading for the old coal mine. They reached the mine just as the first light of dawn broke over the mountains. The group descended into the tunnels, leaving the town of Ashwood behind. As they emerged on the other side of the mountain, they saw what Caleb had described: a world in chaos, overrun with the undead. But there was hope. They weren't alone in the fight. The survivors steeled themselves for what lay ahead, knowing that the road would be long and dangerous, but they had one another, and they had a chance. And sometimes, in a world filled with the dead, a chance was all you needed.